Hello, my name is Carol McCoy. Today is May 3rd, 2021. We are at the Nashville Bar Association, 150 4th Avenue North in Nashville, Tennessee, and the interview of Dot Dobbins is being conducted for the Legal History Project of the Tennessee Bar Association. Hello, Dot.
Hello, Carol.
Would you please name, date of birth, and place of birth?
Well, what's on my law license is Dot Dobbins. My birth name is Dorothy Eileen Dobbins, but no one ever called me that. My grandmother called me Dorothy, but she's been dead a very long time.
Okay.
So Dot Dobbins is what I've used all of my professional life. I figured if Jimmy Carter could do it, so could I.
Very good.
So there you go.
And your date and place of birth?
My date of birth is July 17th, 1947. I was born in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Would you give us a little background on your family, your paternal grandparents and your maternal grandparents, and then your father and mother?
Okay. My maternal grandparents were Nola and Carter Smith, who lived in Selmer, Tennessee. Neither of them finished high school, but all of their 4 children finished college, and all of them had a professional or a graduate degree. My father's parents were Sally Pearl Dobbins, and Wilkinson was her maiden name, and James DeWitt Dobbins. They lived in Denton, Texas. I think my grandfather finished high school. He was an accountant. But then, because of health reasons, had to work outside and became a manager of a brick plant.
And your father, what was his name? Where was he born and when? And what did he do by way of business and civic activities and political or community activities?
My father's name was Claude Ray Dobbins. He went by Ray. He was born in Denton, Texas.
When?
January the 25th, 1919. And he was the editor, he was a minister. He had a divinity degree and a master's degree, actually.
From
He was
where?
going to get a PhD, but he didn't.
From where?
From Bethel College in McKenzie, Tennessee.
All right.
But he didn't have a church except for when I and my sister were babies, very young. And then he became the editor of the Cumberland Presbyterian Denominational Magazine. And that's what he did throughout his career. He did preach at little supply pastoring, often at rural churches in Tennessee. I grew up in Memphis, and the publishing house was first in Nashville, and then very shortly I moved to Memphis. So most of his career he was in Memphis. He was a yellow dog Democrat. He said he was born Cumberland Presbyterian and Democrat, and he didn't see any reason to change either one of those. So, and so he was involved in a lot of civic things, the Civitan Club, and another discussion group, Crosscut Club. He was involved in the Ministers Association that helped try to settle the garbage strikers during when Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis. So he was involved in a lot of things politically.
And did he have any interests for relaxation or things that he liked to do?
He had 7 children, so he didn't have a whole lot of time.
Well, let's talk about your mother then.
But he did grow roses, and he did usually have a little vegetable garden in addition to that. So later on, he had bigger vegetable gardens, but he grew beautiful roses, and often took them to his office, and it was just lovely. So my younger brother Bill continues that tradition on. He grows roses. So, but Mother, she was the first person from Selmer, Tennessee to not only get a college degree but a graduate degree, and she got her master's degree in education at Peabody here in Nashville. Her college degree...
When was she born?
She was born February 8th, 1916, and she was born in Selmer, Tennessee. She finished her college degree at
Peabody.
At Bethel College also, but she started it at another college in Mississippi, and I can't remember what it was called. She went to school in the summer. She went to college for 1 year, and then she could get her teaching certificate, and then she went to school in the summer and did that in Mississippi, but then went to Bethel and finished her degree there. And so...
Very progressive for a woman at that time in society.
Exactly. For her to have gone on, and then her younger sister was a nurse, and her younger brother was a lawyer, and her youngest sister was a social worker, so all of them had professional degrees, which in Selmer was not real common.
Now, you mentioned 7 children.
Yes.
Did your mother work during the marriage?
Oh, yes.
What did
she
she?
had to. She taught school. I mean, she had a master's in education. That was her field. She
What
taught.
grade?
When she first started, she taught, I think, 4th grade. But she mostly taught 2nd grade for many years. And then when she finished teaching, she was teaching something called transition, which was for children who had gone to kindergarten but weren't quite ready to do 1st grade. And so she taught transition for the last of her career.
Did she share your father's interest in politics?
Well, she was more interested in politics, but she was not really. I mean, they both were very involved in the church. We we were at the church every time the doors were open. There was a missionary society and that she was involved in, and but she mainly looked after children, taught school, and went to church. And that covered most of what she did. And she was a good cook, and in the summer she would can and make jams and jellies, and so she would freeze up a lot of things, get stuff from the farmer's market if the garden hadn't produced enough to feed us all, because there were a lot of mouths to feed.
And tell me who they were.
My oldest sister is Catherine, and she is retired now, but was a doctor.
And where is she?
She is in California, and she practiced in San Mateo, but she lives in Marin County. I can't tell you the name of the little town.
And who's number 2?
I'm the 2nd child.
We'll talk about you in a minute.
We'll talk more about me
Number
later.
3.
And then my younger brother is James, and he lives in Seattle now. But his career was teaching at Oberlin University. He was a professor there, had a PhD from Yale. And he taught Japanese Buddhism, Japanese history, and traveled to Japan many times. I went to Japan many times because he went to Japan many times. So, and then my youngest sister after James is Alice, and she has multiple degrees in art, but works at Vanderbilt as an administrative assistant. She lives here in Nashville. She's the artiste. And then my brother Bill lives here. Well, he lives out in Leapers Fort. He does lobbying with the legislature for the Mental Health Association and some other groups. I can't remember who else he's lobbying for, but he has a master's in public administration. And he worked for the state for quite a long time.
In what department? Mental
Public health.
Public
He worked in the water quality department for a lot of years. And then he worked for he was director of this state association for water services for 10 or 15 years he did that. And then Cindy, my youngest sister, lives in Atlanta, and she is an accountant at Emory.
Oh.
And then John, my youngest brother.
He's the baby.
He's the baby. He lives in Memphis. He is a IT person. He does computer whiz bang, whatever. When he and my nephew, who does that, get together and talk, I can't understand anything they say.
But you're happy to see them when they come.
I'm always glad to see them, for sure. But that's what he does, so.
Well, having laid the groundwork, tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, was born in Bowling Green, but only lived there 6 months, and then my parents moved here when Daddy took the job with the church editing the magazine to
In
Nashville.
Nashville.
But that office moved to Memphis in 1951, 2, or 3, I can't remember anyway.
Before you started.
Before I started school. So I went to school I grew up in Memphis and went away to college from Memphis.
So Memphis really was your home
My
growing
growing
up.
up home.
And
Yes.
do you remember any specific friends or what you and your friends liked to do for fun, where you might have traveled, what you had as far as hobbies or reading, any of those things?
Well, I played outside with my friends most of the time. We played in the neighborhood with other friends. I had a good friend live behind me, and so we were good friends all the way through elementary school. And so we just played outside all the time in the summer when not in school. And sometimes if the weather was good after school, but that was mostly it. I did like to read, so I read books, but mostly just playing with my friends was.
Where did you go to grade school?
Cherokee Elementary School, which was several blocks from my home. We could walk to school or walk home. Daddy would drop us off and we would walk home. And then went to Sherwood Junior High, which was also within walking distance. Mother would drop us off there and would walk home usually. And then went to Central High School, which was downtown, close to my father's office. And so he would drop us off there, and we could ride the bus home from Central.
What were some of your favorite classes?
I actually liked math. There was several really good math teachers, although there was a really good English teacher, Miss Metz. She was...
What was her name?
Metz, M-E-T-Z. She was extraordinarily good. But my algebra teacher was Miss Shoemaker, and she was wonderful, and she taught Algebra 1 and 2 and trig, and I really liked her a lot. Geometry, not so much, but anyway.
Were there any special events that happened in high school that you recall?
Well, I was in the Honor Society, and trying to remember other things that I did. Oh, we went to football games and dated some.
Did you
in
work
high
at all
school.
during school?
I worked in the summer at the Memphis Housing Authority.
What did you do?
Just flunky clerk, secretary clerk work, just go for it.
Just one summer or more than one?
You know, I think I started work there the summer of my senior year. But before that, I mainly babysat to make money, bought my contact lens.
And when you finished high school, how many children were there at that time?
7.
7 by the time you finished high school.
Yes.
And did you have any responsibilities for any of the little ones?
Oh, gosh, yes. I mean, I was junior mom for Mother. I looked after the little ones a lot for her. Catherine wasn't so interested in looking after the children, but I looked after, the 2 youngest ones, Cindy and John, were my babies. Totally looked after them. Bill and Alice, I was not, I was 5 when Alice was born, so I wasn't quite, and only 7 or 8 when Bill was born, so I wasn't really big enough. But Cindy, I was 8 or 9, and I could look after her and tote her around. She was like a baby doll. And then I was 12 when John was born, so I could look after him. So I did a lot of looking after kids for Mom. when she needed to go to the grocery store or do stuff, errands or whatever, then I would look after her and all the rest of the kids.
And how did you decide on where you were going to go to college?
Okay, Catherine had gone to SMU in Dallas, and Dad's family was in Denton, which was just north of Dallas, and I loved going. I went to Texas in the summer a lot and visited his family. Loved his family. His family was the sweetest people, and so I loved going to Texas to visit my relatives. So I wanted to go to Texas, so I went to SMU, where Catherine was in Dallas, so I could still see my relatives in Denton. It wasn't a real brilliant reason for going to college, but it turned out well. I mean, I actually liked SMU a lot. I had a good time. I really had a good experience in college. It was quite a good thing.
What did you major in?
Well, see, I was going to major in math. That was what I was going to do until I got signed up for advanced calculus. That was a real mistake. I dropped that after 2 weeks. Never looked back. I was undecided there for a while. It was like, math, clearly not for me. Had to take a regular calculus class because there was a one math course requirement. So I took the regular calculus and managed to squeak through that. But I did not like calculus at all. And so never took another math class after that. That totally ended my math career. So I was undecided for a while, and then I had no idea what I was going to major in. And so SMU had this very interesting major called social sciences, and you could pick 3 of 9 departments and take 15 hours in one department, 9 hours in another, and 6 in another. And I did government, history, and religion. Government, religion, and history, mainly just for the teachers that were good.
Who were they?
Boy, I can't remember what was this guy's name that taught. There was a woman who taught at the law school that I took some government classes from. I can't remember her name. And another guy taught government. I really liked him too, but I can't remember his name. Been too long. I haven't thought of them in a long time. But the religion courses I took were with a guy whose name I know.
They'll come. We'll get that.
He was a Quaker, which I didn't find out till way later, which is interesting. He was such a good teacher. Good heavens, he was really good. And I took about 3 or 4 courses with him. I mean, he was just excellent. So I really liked it. And then I took a couple of history courses that were just throw away, whatever. Anyhow, they weren't as important. I had to have a third one, so I just picked a couple of history
What did
courses.
you do to have such a great time in college?
Well, I was a dorm counselor, and I was involved in some student government things, some committees, and was on a freshman council thing. Freshman year, I was in mortar board. I was in this group called Kirkos, and just some honorary things that I got. And, I mean, I had to have a scholarship to go to school, which was good. Good thing I did well in high school.
Did you get a tuition scholarship?
Yeah, I did get a tuition
That's
scholarship.
wonderful.
And SMU also had scholarships for ministers' kids, so Catherine and I got those, which was a good thing. And you had to keep your grades up to keep your scholarship scores, so I had to do well enough at school to keep my scholarships, which I did.
And you were working part-time as a dorm counselor, right?
I did that sophomore and junior year. I did, freshman year, did work study, which was working over in the student center, just an information counter, making change for people. I mean, it was fairly boring. You could read, whatever. And so sophomore and junior year, I was a dorm counselor, and you did get tuition. No, you didn't get, you got room and board for doing that, so that was a good thing. And then my last year, I did work study again.
And in college, did you make any friends that became lifelong buddies?
Well, I had a lot of good friends, mainly a lot of people that were on my freshman floor I was good friends with, and continued to be friends with. I mean, one of them I visited in New York. One of them lives in Winnipeg. I've never been to Winnipeg, but I have seen her a time or two since. So I've seen them at some reunions.
And how did you spend your summers between each year?
Then I went back and worked for the housing authority. I did that 3 years. Summer after my junior year, I was also involved in the student YWCA. In fact, I was president of that 1 year or two. I can't remember now, but that got me. John and Marie Grimes was a.
Johnny Marie Grimes
was one of the vice presidents of the school, and she was on the national YWCA board. So she was real supportive of the student YWCA there, and got me on a national student committee, so that I went to New York several times while I was in college for that work with the national YWCA, which was wonderful, fabulous. So actually, one of my friends who had left school after 2 years, she was there, and so I stayed with Mimi in New York when I would go to these things in New York for the YWCA, which was a wonderful experience for me. And so because of that work, they were sponsoring a seminar in the summer after my junior year, and John and Marie again, I thought this would be a swell thing for me to do, and it looked really interesting. I thought I would love doing it, but that meant I didn't work.
Oh.
And I always had to work to make it to school. And so Johnny and Marie found money for me to be able to do that. Unbelievable. It was in Berkeley, California, not in the neighborhood. That was an incredible experience. So I went to Berkeley that summer and did this seminar about social change that was fascinating. It was very different. We lived in a communal house, student housing communal house, where we cooked together, and it was really fun. That was a terrific experience for me.
And what year was that?
That was the summer after my junior year, before my senior year.
And when did you graduate?
I graduated in '69, so it would have been the summer of '68.
There was a lot happening in '68.
California was an interesting place. Berkeley was an interesting place to be in the summer of 1968, I have to say. Yes, that's true.
Yes, because
all kinds of things were happening out there.
A lot of social unrest.
There was all kinds of interesting things.
And
we went to a demonstration one night.
What do you recall about that, as far as either in Memphis?
Getting away from tear gas.
Oh.
I do remember that. We had to run to this church that we got away from. We went to this demonstration in the Alameda County.
Were you out demonstrating?
Well, we just sort of went to this march thing, and it
turned into a demonstration.
Turned into, I don't even remember if it was about the war. I can't even remember now exactly. Or it may have been poor people's. It's a little vague. It's been a long time. Anyway, I do remember running to get away from tear gas and walking back to our. We were just blocks from where I lived, so we ended up going back home.
So you finished with a degree in
social sciences.
Social sciences, and what were you going to do with that?
Well, what I always wanted to do when I was going to go from the time I was in high school, I wanted to go to the Peace Corps. So I was going to go to the Peace Corps. So I applied to go to the Peace Corps, and I wanted to go to Africa or Micronesia, either one, didn't care. And didn't hear from them, and graduated, still didn't hear from them. And that summer in June, they called me and said, "How would you like to go to Afghanistan?" I was like, well, tell me something about it, like where it is. because I had no idea where Afghanistan was actually then. It was not on my radar as a place. They said, well, you could go to Estes Park, Colorado, and train to go to Afghanistan. How about it? Okay. What the hey? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Well, I went and trained to go to Afghanistan, and the more I learned about it, the other thing that I got involved in, certainly through the YWCA, was women's liberation stuff. I was pretty involved in that, and was involved in a women's group when I was in college, and was reading a lot of interesting. When I would go to New York, there was a women's center there that had radical literature that I gave to you.
Yes, you did.
You read some of that when we were
Yes.
in law school. But
You had already made the conversion by the time I met you.
oh heavens, yes, I was involved in that in college,
And what were you reading?
What
was the radical literature?
You always read Feminine Mystique, and you read Dialectic of Sex, and I mean, just hey, feminist stuff. So when I was training to go to Afghanistan, turned out that was not going to be a very good match, because Afghanistan was a conservative Muslim country. And even though at that time it was not as conservative as it later on became, there was, you could, in Kabul in particular, Americans were, there were a fair number of Americans, and you could get along. And if I had been going to Kabul, I would have gone. I was going to be in a province town, God knows where, teaching English to girls. And I decided, this is not going to work out. I'm still working on this feminist stuff, and Afghanistan was not going to push me along that path. I was pretty sure. So I bailed on Afghanistan, which was really hard because I didn't have anything else to do. I hadn't applied to graduate school. I didn't have any job. I had nothing out here. I was going to go to the Peace Corps. Wrong, that didn't work out. So I came home. Boy, was that depressing. Worked for just temporary services in the summer.
And what happened in your life when there were events like the death of Martin Luther King or Bobby Kennedy?
I was in school. I was in Dallas, of course, when
Right.
King was killed. But he was killed Thursday night, and I was going home the next day for spring break. And Daddy had been involved with the Ministers Association and the garbage workers strike. And so I went home Friday, and the march on the Memorial March for King was on Saturday. And my brother James and I went to that, not telling my mother we were going, but we went. And Daddy went to it as well.
Did you go with your father?
I didn't. He went from his office.
Did he know you were going?
I can't remember. He may have known we were going. But he went with people from his office. And James and I went down and went with another friend of his from college and some friends who had their black children went with us. And we just went down on our own and went to that march. And then eventually, which was incredible numbers of people. I mean, incredible numbers of people were at that march. So that was certainly memorable, but that was my spring break of my junior year, I guess. Anyway, so Daddy got all kinds of hate mail. Oh Lord, it was not good. And Mother was really frightened for him as well.
Were you frightened?
The march itself was very peaceful, and so I was not frightened. I mean, it was weird because in Memphis, there were tanks because they expected all this unrest. You know, I mean, and there were, I don't remember if it was Army Reserves or if it was other folks, but there were guys there on the streets with guns with bayonets on them. That was, as we were marching downtown, that was what we saw. And these guys were young. They were young as I was, or younger. I mean, they were young guys. National Guard. They were probably National Guard rather than Army Reserve. I don't know. Guys with guns and bayonets. It was startling. That was a little bit freaky.
Then after the march, you all went home.
Went home.
And you still had spring break during that week, right?
Yeah, and there was still
a lot of unrest.
Well, there was certainly National Guard all over. Like I said, on streets you would see tanks down there. It was strange looking for sure. It didn't look quite normal by any means that week. Now that went away. Well, I went back to school after a week, so
right.
I was back.
And where were
Dallas.
you when Robert Kennedy was killed?
Well, I
think it was in August.
No, it was in June. He was killed in June.
June, okay.
1st of June, give or take. I was home
From school?
From school, probably working, I guess. Yeah, that was pretty sad. Sad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
I was home that summer.
You've decided that the Peace Corps wasn't for you, and
right.
You're at home. You're working for a temporary agency. Would you tell people what a temporary agency is?
Well, it's just you call in and they have jobs.
I don't know that they have them anymore.
They used to have. Maybe they don't have them anymore. You could just call in and get a job to go fill in for a secretary or whatever, whatever jobs they had.
And this was at a time when the want ads were segregated by sex.
Yeah, they were back then. So mostly
would say men want it
and women want it. Yes,
and the men's jobs paid
more,
2 to 3 times more than the jobs that women paid. But
this is true.
The temporary agency would give you a little questionnaire and find out what your skill sets were, and then they try to find a job for you on a temporary basis.
Do a typing test and blah, 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 whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what you were doing after you graduated from college.
In the summer, I was doing that. But then my friends in Dallas, who I had gone to school with, said, come down here. They had an apartment, and there was room for me to stay there with them. And they knew that the welfare department was hiring people, and I should come down and could get a job. They knew people where I could get a job in Dallas, and I had a place to live. This was good. And staying at home with mom and dad, not a good plan. That was a bad plan. So I went to Dallas and lived with my friends and worked for the welfare department for a year. Met Don Hollingsworth, and we got engaged that summer. We're going to get married in the fall. Broke up, didn't get married. I decided to go to New York. Since I didn't get to go to the Peace Corps, I decided I would live someplace out of the South. Just thought I would, and I knew a few people with the YWCA in New York. And there was a friend of my parents who lived in the city, and so I knew a few people and just decided, had saved up some money and went to New York and tried to find a job. And it took me 2 months to find a job, which was terrifying, but did finally find a job working for a Job Corps center in Jersey City, New Jersey. I think this whole city council was indicted that year that I was there, but it was kind of a rough and tough place there across the river from the city, and was a residence counselor for young women who were 16 to 22 training to get their GED and one of 5 job training programs that they had there. Horrible program. I mean, it just was not a good, it was really, really few kids ever finished their programs. I mean, few ever finished. A few, not, like I say.
How many were enrolled? 20,
Gosh.
40, 80?
We were in this building that had 14 floors on it, but only the second through the 14th floor had, I mean, these kids lived there.
And you were the residential?
It was a residential program for kids 16 to 22, girls 16 to 22, who were trying to get their GED and get job training.
And were you like the residential advisor?
I was like a dorm counselor.
For certain floors?
For a floor.
One floor?
One floor.
And how many young
Probably
women
had 28
that you were
kids.
responsible for?
Yeah, so there was a whole, out of 14 floors and 28 kids, there were a lot of kids there.
That's a lot of young women.
But I could go to the city. There was a bus outside where I lived into the city, or I could, several blocks away, I could get the subway into the city. And so, but having looked for a job, and it had taken me so long, I decided I needed more credentials. So I was looking at doing a master's in social work or law school.
And why did you look at law school?
Think about law school. Well, Don was going to go. He was doing alternative service work in Dallas and had done 1 year of law school, and he was going back to law school. And I figured that I was as smart as he was. And if he could do law school, I probably could too. What the heck? And I'd taken those legal courses in college, and I liked them.
Right.
I thought they were interesting. So I can't remember if I ever applied to social work schools.
Did you know any lawyers at the time that you applied?
Well, my uncle was a lawyer.
Okay.
Was not close to him.
But you knew.
He was a prosecutor.
You knew at least a lawyer.
I knew a lawyer.
Okay.
I didn't know any women lawyers. 0 women lawyers.
Right. And you took
And sort of part of my feminist stuff was, I thought, many women do this. We need probably more women to do this. So I thought
Good
I would
rationale.
go do my bit for women's liberation and go to law school. What the hey? My sister was in medical school, so I thought, hey, maybe I should do that.
And where did you apply?
I applied to, Catherine was at UNC in Chapel Hill, and so I applied there because I'd gone down and visited her. It was a gorgeous campus, and so I applied there. I applied to Duke. She had a friend who was at Duke Law.
You liked Duke?
I loved Duke. I thought Duke was great. I visited all the campuses, and I applied to Vanderbilt because Don was going back to Vanderbilt. So I applied to those 3, got in Vanderbilt, got in UNC, and then got on wait list at Duke, and Duke was my first choice. I was really disappointed. Anyway.
Did you get a scholarship?
To Vanderbilt, yeah, I did. Got a scholarship to Vanderbilt. So I went to Vanderbilt.
What year did you start?
71.
And how many students were there, and how many were men and how many were women?
There were 150 students in my class, and there were 12 women. And that was the biggest class of women the school had ever had. Most they had ever had. 12 out of 150. Holy smoke. And I think the your class had 4
Correct.
maybe in it, and the third year class had 6 because they had a transfer. They only had 5, I think. There weren't many women there. We could kind of meet together in the bathroom if we wanted to, because there just weren't that many of us. So it was pretty shocking. Lots of the guys were Vietnam vets who were there on the GI Bill. It was not the most welcoming place for women, I have to say.
What do you remember about the professors and the courses that you took?
given I hated law school, I have tried to forget most of that experience because it was not a good experience for me.
So you must have had Tom McCoy for
I
contracts.
did have Tom McCoy for contracts, and he was decent. He was decent. He was a pretty good teacher. Carl Gordon was excellent. He
For
taught
evidence.
Criminal. He may have taught evidence too. I can't remember now. I mean, there were people that were just not memorable at all. I avoided Hartman like the plague. I didn't get to take anything from him. I mean, I got enough from Don could tell me enough about, warn me off of some people. Just don't go there. Don't do it. Be sorry. Skip that.
So you,
I never
even though
took
you
corporations.
didn't continue with marriage, you were still friends with Don Hollingsworth.
Right. We were still friends.
Okay.
So I don't know that I would have continued on at law school had it not been for the fact that I started work at Legal Aid that summer. And that was what I wanted to do.
First summer?
First summer, after freshman year,
And
after my first
who
year.
was there when you started working? Who was the director?
David Candish was the director, but Walter Kurtz interviewed me and hired me.
And he was third year.
He was. He and Ashley Welcher were third year, and they were working there. And Dave Tarpley was there.
He wasn't very big.
Gordon may have started there because, see, Claudia was in our class, and I think he had just finished at UT. So Gordon had probably started there, Gordon Boneman. Joe, God, what was his last name? From Cookville. Yeah. His office is right next to mine. I could yell over the wall to Joe and ask him questions because the walls didn't go to the ceiling. It was pretty cheap rental property in the Sudicum building. Anyway, what was Joe's last name? Oh, well, it might come to me. Anyhow, he, nice guy, but he ended up going to Cookville. He was from there and he ended up going there. I can't remember really any, Luis Fontecchio worked there, as did Barney. Ross? Barney, last name could be different than that. They were second-year students that worked there in the summer. They worked there in the summer like I did.
I remember Louise. I'm trying to.
Barney, I can't remember his last
come
name.
up with
Anyway,
Barney.
so they were there as students. It wasn't a big office, really.
And what did you do?
Actually, that first summer, they had a juvenile court office, and I worked with R.B.J. Campbell there. He drove me crazy.
He was African American.
He was African American.
Why did he drive you crazy?
He wanted me to be a secretary and to do all his secretarial work for him. And he and I had sparks because of it. I was not there just to do his secretarial work. So gratefully, Walter sort of backed me up, but and I think they ended up closing that office. I don't remember what RBG, he went and did something else. He wasn't there after that. So I got moved back downtown.
And what kept you in law school? Because you were doing this for the women's movement. Remember, your sister
Right.
went to medical school
Yeah,
and you were
that's
going to
true.
law
I was gonna
school,
go-
but you didn't like it.
I hated it. I hated the school. But I liked the work. I mean, I liked, when I got to interview clients at juvenile court, I liked doing that. I liked, going to the courtroom and sort of making notes and keeping up with whatever, or calling people and setting up things. I mean, I could tell that I liked the work. I just didn't like the school. Didn't like it. So I worked part-time then during second and third year, and in the summer I worked full-time. And so third year, we were, that summer of my third year, we could go to court. That was very cool. And Ashley and Walter, who had just finished, who had just graduated and were taking the bar, they couldn't go to court. because it was for the third-year law students that could go to court. Weird. So there was a tiny bit of time there that law students were the only people doing court work for legal aid. I mean, it was just like weird, but we did all the running to court, whatever. Just never remember my first thing that Walter handed me. Just said, "Here's a motion.
Now,
Go to court." No, he said, "Go find Gail Jennings in the clerk's office, and she will tell you what you need to do." Okay. Off I went. And sure enough, clerk stopped me out of practice law. It was great. It was wonderful. Hadn't been for clerks, I would not have survived, for sure. So thank you, Gail. And
now,
all the other judges' clerks. You used to go in and sit next to talk to the judges, secretaries, and clerks, and they would just tell you everything, tell you about all the other lawyers, warn you off of people. It was wonderful. They were just great. Anyway, yep.
how did your interest in women's rights gel or get combined with your legal education while you were in school?
Well, we started the Women Lawyers Association, or the Women Lawyers Association. That was it. Yeah, that first year, because there were enough of us finally to do actually a little group. So we started that, and you and I and Nancy Chapman went to a conference in Duke, weekend thing, they had an organization, so we sort of found out kind of how to do it.
I thought Aleda went with us too.
Maybe.
There were 4 of us.
Maybe there was. Maybe it was Aleda.
I think it was Aleda. She told me she was never going to have children.
Aleda wasn't, and she was in the class after me. This was the summer, this was when my first year.
Okay.
Because Nancy and I worked in our class together.
There was
Aleda
a
was
fourth,
the year after that.
Right.
But it was definitely you and me and Nancy went, and maybe, I can't remember who else. But anyway, we went to Duke, and that gave us some more idea about how to start the Women Lawyers Association. So we at least did that, which was a good thing. And we got Sissy and Martha Trammell to come talk to us.
Women lawyers in town.
There were a few women lawyers in town, praise the Lord. Jane Ann was there, and Jane Franks. And
Becky
Muriel,
Thomas,
Becky
Rose
Thomas,
Palermo. There were not very many women lawyers.
There were not many women lawyers, but Sissy was at the U.S. Attorney's Office. No, maybe Martha was at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And Sissy was at the DA's office at that point. And so they came and talked to us. And that was helpful, at least, to have some women lawyers come talk to us, which was a good thing.
And you were living in a group home.
Well, the first semester I just had a roommate, and then the second semester I lived with a friend of mine that had gone to college with my brother, and 2 other guys. 3 other guys lived there. I've forgotten. It's been a while. And
it seemed unusual to me that men and women would be living in the same house.
I know, it was, wasn't it?
At that point in time, it was very unusual, since you weren't related.
Well, but it was kind of a thing at that point in time,
You went through all these things as though it were normal, but you were actually cutting edge at the time.
That was a little cutting edge at that point, but sort of one of them hippie commune kind of things, which was fine. Anyway, it was fun. It was fun. That was a good thing.
How would you say that law school helped your career?
Well, it meant I could get a law license. That was important. Getting a law, passing the bar, and that was a miracle that I passed that, because Claudia and I did that together, and we both came out, and I said, Claudia, I guessed it.
This is Claudia Bonneman?
Sheer 50% of those. And she said, yeah, I did too. Okay. It was like, do you think we passed this thing? I was like, oh, Lord. And I said, I don't know, but if I don't pass it, it's going to be a sign I've missed my calling and need to seek another line of work, because I'm not going to do that again. It was like awful.
Now, have you stayed in touch with the 12 women that you went through law school?
Well, I mean, some of them, the ones that stayed here, I guess, certainly Claudia lived a block away from me for many years, so I was in touch with her for sure. We lived fairly close to each other. And
Was Trula Trotter in your class?
yes, see, she went to Memphis, as did Pat, whose last name I can't remember now. They went to Memphis, as did Donna Fisher. And then other folks, Anne someone, I don't remember where she go to Michigan? I've forgotten. Anne, I don't remember her last name, but she went another state. So not a whole heap and a lot of us, I guess, really stayed here that I can remember. Claudia and me. Oh, well.
Well, let's talk about post-law school. You took the
Yes.
bar, you passed it. Where did you go to work? I'm going to guess legal services.
I did in August. Took the bar. Didn't know I passed it still yet. Got hired at Lucy Honey Haynes, went to Dyersburg.
And she was a
she was-
lawyer 2 years ahead of
Yeah,
you.
she was. And so she was working at the Matthew Walker Health Center with Dave Tarpley.
Correct.
Were you there?
Yes.
You were still there. So the three of you were there.
I worked at the Matthew Walker
You were
Health
at
Center
Matthew Walker too. So when
with legal services.
When I went there, it was you and Dave.
And then you
'cause
went downtown.
Lucy, and, well, ultimately they closed that up, but I went downtown when they closed that office.
Actually, I think you went before because Joe Brown came,
Oh, God.
and that's an experience that we will all.
Carry with us for the rest
Yes,
of our
but-
lives. Him sleeping on the library floor, yes, it was
Yes.
wonderful. He was Reggie.
Hubert
Reggie, after
Fellowship.
him, they got rid of him. He got fired, I think. But another Reggie came, Bill went to Dallas. I can't remember Bill's last name. He was lovely. He was a lovely man.
And do you remember
And
kind of what your
Richard
first starting
Jackson.
salary was?
10,500.
And given
Big lots of money back then, right? Yeah.
10,500
And I was still
a
paying
year.
off. I did have some loans from law school too, so I was paying off law school loans. Okay. With the big lot of money, I was working at Legal Aid.
Do you have any idea what some of your contemporaries were getting hired at that time?
Oh, I have really no idea. I don't remember. I mean, I'm sure people working for law firms were making a whole lot more money than I was, but I didn't want to work for a law firm. I was happy doing what I was doing. So,
And let's talk about what you were doing. What were some of the first cases that you
well, the cases, we just took whatever came in the door, basically. I mean, just anything that came in the door. And so.
But only civil.
Only civil, yeah. We only did civil cases. My whole practice, I never did criminal cases. So there were some Social Security disability cases. There were some well, it wasn't SSI. It was changed right around then. It was state disability cases. There were
You would do
divorces.
any bankruptcies?
There were adoptions. There were some juvenile court cases. There were collection cases, general sessions. Those were royal pain, Lord save us.
Any accident cases?
I never
Car wrecks?
had any accident cases that I recall.
Now,
you had
I did.
one.
But one of the
We
things.
didn't have a whole heap and lot of those.
No, because
Because there was
legal
money
s-
in them often at times, and so
legal
we didn't take
services could not take any
fee-generating cases.
fee-generating cases.
Yes.
So if you got an accident case, it would be where you were defending.
Right.
And the
Right.
same about collections.
Right.
You would have to defend people being sued.
Sued, that's right. And then there were sometimes landlord-tenant, you were defending tenants. Those were the ones I can remember. I mean, so it was a variety of things. It was sort of like whatever.
And consumer issues.
Well, those were the landlord-tenant and the
Truth in
contract
lending.
being sued for money cases.
And David Tarpley helped a lot of us.
He then, I don't know, a year or two after that, then when Walter went to Knoxville to public defender work, and Ashley became the director. After Candice left, Walter was director, and then Ashley became director. Before Ashley became director, they set up, he started doing all the divorce cases. So all the divorce cases we had in North Nashville got shifted downtown to Ashley. He did all the divorce cases. And then Tarpley took all the consumer cases. Gordon may have done all the housing cases. With the general section had housing and had kind of all the rest of stuff. So there for a while we were getting the other general cases in North Nashville. Before when Ashley became director, I took over the domestic relations cases.
And that is the area that you handled.
The most of my career was
And
that.
how long were you in charge of domestic relations for legal services? How many years?
Well, I was there for 12 years. So let me see. Probably 9 or 10, I would guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Developed a real expertise in that area.
Yeah. That I learned a bunch with.
Do you remember?
And one of the things that I got to doing, and actually Lou Connor got me involved in that, was the child support guidelines.
And who was Lou Connor?
Lou Connor was, he had been the chair of the Bar Association Domestic Relations Committee, and I had been on that committee with him. And then he became bar president. And they had this commission to set up child support guidelines.
And what did you do?
And he appointed, the bar could have sent somebody, I think maybe ex officio, I can't quite remember. Anyway, I ended up going to that thing and worked on getting the child support guidelines set up, this was toward the end of when I was at Legal Aid, though, because I then went to Human Services, and they were enacted while I was at Human Services, and we were still responsible for it. So I was still working with that commission.
It was a very major piece of legislation.
It was a major piece of, it was federally mandated, and it was a major piece of legislation. And so, I think we started working on it maybe in '87, and I think it had to be enacted in '89. Every state had to enact it in '89. And that was a trip, because we put together income shares proposal that the legislature turned down. And they enacted a percentage guideline because it was easier, because they thought income shares was too complicated, too hard for those judges out in the counties and whatever to figure out. They just wanted something easy.
So the percentages were based on the number of children that a parent might have.
Exactly.
And it was a percent of the net or gross of the other parent.
Exactly, and I can't quite remember anymore what it was. Seems like it might have been based on gross, but I can't swear to that. Could have been. No, I think it was based on gross because net was too funny to calculate. But it was a fairly low percentage. Anyway, so it was, so that's what the legislature did. They turned down what this commission
Had recommended.
picked and went with this other states had just this percentage one, and they picked that instead. So, but that was when I was at Human Services after I left Legal Aid that got enacted. So that was another.
And during these 10, 12 years that you were at Legal Services, did your interest in women's rights continue?
Oh yeah, we had the Women's Political Caucus was formed around then, and I was involved in that group. And then in 81, we formed the Lawyers Association for Women here in Nashville. So and I was one of the founding members of, as were you. So we had several things going on about continuing to be involved in women's issues.
Did you find when you started practicing law,
There was a women's center over at
Surratt?
Surratt, yeah, and I did volunteer work there at one point. This was back before I was in law school, because before Roe versus Wade, we were helping women to get to New York to get abortions, because it wasn't legal here. And so, and I think my senior year, I think the moot court issue was the Roe v. Wade case. How's that for interesting?
Very.
Timely. Because it was decided in '74.
Did you find that you were warmly received in the course, even though you were a woman?
Well, we were kind of strange because there weren't that many of us. It's what they said. It was like a dancing dog. It's not that they do it well, it's that they do it at all, kind of thing, right? But there were Becky Thomas and Muriel Robinson and Jane Franks and some of the other folks that were practicing were real kind and very helpful. And I could call them and ask them for help or you, except then you went off and worked for the state. You went off with Jane Ann and did revenue, which was no help. Didn't need any help about revenue. Didn't have none. Didn't need any help about revenue.
Did you go to any of the rural counties in practice while you were at Legal Services?
I did not do a great deal of that. Occasionally I had to go, it seemed like I had to go down to Murfreesboro, maybe up to Gallatin occasionally. Later on in my practice, I occasionally went to those other courts.
But not with Legal Services. It hadn't spread that far at that time.
It spread in the Carter administration. What was that, 80? Is that right?
Oh, it was
80,
70
78?
in the Carter administration.
Well, that's when legal aid got money.
Correct.
And that's when we expanded into
To the
the
other
surrounding
surrounding counties.
Was it during the Carter administration? So that was right. And opened those other offices, because that was, we didn't have any out there. The legal aid was here and in Memphis and in Knoxville and Johnson City, and that was it. And if you were in the other counties, you were just flat out of luck.
So
it was,
besides the dancing dog image, did you have any difficulty with your peers, not just the judges, but with your peers accepting you as an equal in the practice of law?
Younger lawyers, not as much. Oh, well, some of them made fun of you, but you just sort of ignored them and went on. But some of the older lawyers were, sort of condescending and how's the prettiest legs in the courthouse kind of comments. And that was, you just figured they were going to eventually die. You just didn't pay any attention to them and went on, because they weren't going to be there that long. You're going to keep on going. They were just going to go away.
But
Yeesh.
before we move on
Yes.
to your new position with the state, you continued your community involvement because in the 70s you became president of the local YWCA.
I did. That's
And
true.
What do you recall
That
about
was crazy.
that organization in Nashville, Tennessee?
Well, that was, the YWCA was having real financial problems at that point, and the building downtown was falling apart. And the year I was president, we ended up selling the building.
It was on 7th Avenue.
It's on 7th Avenue. The building's still there. Ultimately, it was restored, which was a good thing.
Had a swimming pool in the basement.
Had a swimming pool in the basement.
With a crack in it, so they couldn't use it.
So it was leaking. Not a good thing. There were all kinds of real problems with this building. It didn't, there was a tad, while it didn't have heat and it didn't have water. I mean, it was a mess.
But
right
they
then.
were still letting young women stay there.
Initially, that did not last a whole long time. They quit doing that, but they were still letting young women stay in the building. But
What did you discover about the young women that were staying there, as far as the executive director and their race?
Well, the executive director did not understand finances, and we didn't know that until things were in a real financial crisis before we realized how bad things were. There had been an accountant who had stolen money from the organization, and then they found that out, and that one was prosecuted some way or the other. In any case, the whole situation was totally out of hand. I mean, financially, the director was not able to handle the finances in any way, shape, or form. And I pretty much, well, I told her I was going to resign. I could not, in good conscience, continue to be the president of this board, knowing the train wreck that the finances were in. I just couldn't do it. And she resigned.
I recall they had Penn Central stock in their portfolio in 1974, and it went bankrupt in 1968.
Oh, well, that was bad. That
I also remember
that
that you told me
Yeah.
that she required that the floors be segregated by race. White young women didn't stay on the same floor as black
See,
young women.
I'd even repress that, because that was clearly not legal. Even at that point, that was not legal, so.
But I admired everything that you were doing,
Right.
because
You were on the board, too.
I was on the board,
I
and
shanghaied you into being on the board, oh, Lord.
you were championing so much as far as change and trying to save the organization.
I did. I thought it was going to go under. I swear, I thought the thing was going to go under,
But it was on your watch that the building got
the
sold
building finally got sold.
and moved to,
Well, they bought the property down on Woodmont and ultimately ended up building another building, which was a good thing. But it was very sad. I mean, I would leave board meetings and cry going home. It was so sad. It was so sad. It was so sad.
but you helped shift the focus from
Right.
residential to focusing on domestic violence
Right.
and the displaced homemaker, and
Right.
having some way for women who were either going through divorce or
Right.
hadn't received their education to have additional opportunities,
Skills. Learn some skills.
programs that would make them employable,
Yeah. Right.
help them with their children,
Yep.
keep them from being battered.
We did. We started the domestic relations program, which we initially started it with just an employment program, because that's all we could get money for. But then we raised money to start the shelter. Actually, the first shelter was actually a building that we got use of a building from West End Methodist. It was a residence that was on that property that they let us use. That was the first shelter we had. And so they let us use that initially, and then during that time, money got raised to try to build it moved to another building over close to Hillsborough Village. So it was a building too, an existing building. It wasn't one that got built. That was much later on.
Let me ask you about how you dealt with clients at legal services who were battered. Do you remember the first or some of the first cases that you had where it doesn't sound like you saw much physical abuse in your own home?
No.
So when
Did
people
not.
came in, you
Did
interviewed
not.
them and they would tell you about it.
Yes.
What did you do when you had a woman who had been physically abused and you could see it?
Stabbed. I mean, stabbed. Could have died. Poor one that I remember. She could have been dead, and if she'd gone back to. And the difficulty was, a lot of the times you would, represent these folks and maybe try to file for divorce, or try to convince the person that they need to get a divorce and get out, or find them a way to have a safe place to go, and they would go back to the person who had abused them.
Do you think that's changed much?
Well, it would depend on whether, if the person has children and they don't have a job and don't have a place for those children to go, I suspect it still is a real problem, particularly for women who are immigrant folks who don't have language skills so much. I would think this is still a problem. I don't think this has all gone away.
In your practice,
we have shelters now,
right,
gratefully, but there's not enough spaces, and so there's still real problems, and particularly for people that have, where English is not their first language.
Was it a shock to you to find out that this happened in marriages?
Well, obviously, there were clients that I had that kind of a problem. And there were, at going to women in the law conferences, there were seminars there about domestic relations and about domestic violence. And so, before you even might have had a case, you heard about it by virtue of going to women in the law conferences and seeing that this is a serious issue, and it is a serious issue, still a serious issue. So it became apparent, and that was why we were trying to start a domestic violence program, because we knew it was a problem, and that was early on. So
it was early on.
It was early on in the 70s.
You mentioned that after 9 years of doing strictly domestic relations,
Mm-hmm.
you got appointed to the committee on the child support guidelines, and then, as it was being considered and
Mm-hmm.
the legislature was dealing with it, you moved to the Department of Human Services. How
Right.
did that happen?
That happened because Nancy Ann Min became Commissioner of Human Services.
Under McWhorter.
Under McWhorter. She had worked in his campaign, and
And you knew her?
And I knew her in that Well, I knew her through the Mondale Ferraro campaign.
Okay.
Because I was Davidson County coordinator for that campaign, and she was McWhorter's campaign statewide director that same year. And so I knew her.
And interacted with her politically.
I interacted with her because of the politics of that campaign that year. And she was, working for Passberry or whatever back then. And so, we weren't close friends, but we at least knew who each other were. And so, then she
asked you to come?
Called me and asked me to become general counsel, which was a little uneasy because Louise Fontecchio was general counsel before me. And so, of course, I had known her since law school, and she had been there for years, had been with the department and I had known her. She worked at juvenile court originally, and then, so I had known her when I was at Legal Aid. She was working with the department. And then she got moved to state office eventually. So I don't remember how long she'd been at state office as commissioner, but she had been there for a while. And so when Nancy Ann asked me to do that, Louise called me, actually, and congratulated me on that. She was very gracious, and she was very helpful. She really, I started in March, and we overlapped for a couple of weeks, and she took me, I had to do all the legislative work. This was a crazy job, totally crazy job.
And what year was that?
I don't know what I was thinking. I was there from 87 until 90. I was there 3.5 years. From March of 87 to August or September of 90. And
How many staff attorneys did you have?
I had 2 in state office and 14 out in the field, all the way across the state, because we had attorneys who were doing the juvenile court work in all the counties. I had 3 in Memphis, 1 guy out of Jackson who was covering about 15 counties. I mean, bless his heart. And then we had 2 in Cookeville, 2 in Knoxville, 1 in Johnson City who was covering about 8 counties, and 1 down in Chattanooga who was covering about 7 or 8 counties. I mean, it was a totally crazy job. I mean, all those jobs were totally, there were 2 in Davidson, 2 or 3 in Davidson County. Anyway, it was nuts. I spent all my time trying to hire other lawyers because nobody could do the job they were being asked to do. So I was in state office, and I had 1 lawyer who was in charge of social services programs and 1 who was in charge of family assistance programs. And family assistance was AFD, aid to families with dependent children, food stamps, Medicaid eligibility, and child support. That's all, just cover all that. And then social services was foster care, adult protective services, child protective services, adoptions. That's all. Oh, and social services block grants, which is a gajillion things. I mean, a gajillion things out there. I had been there for 2.5 years, and somebody came and said, I need to talk to you about our refugee program. And I said, we have a refugee program? Well, tell me something about it. I didn't know we had a refugee program. It was one of those social services block grants. Really? Okay. Because there were like 35 of them over there. I mean, I didn't know what they all were. Merciful heavens. It was the craziest job I've ever had.
How many?
Craziest job.
What was the work schedule like?
Well, it was nuts. I started in March. My daughter at that time.
You said it was nice or nuts?
Nuts. Totally crazy. It was totally craziest job I've ever had. I was doing all the legislative work for the department, which meant we had to review any bill that affected any departmental program. And we had to go up and we had to write summaries of it for the legislators, and we had to go up and lobby about it if we had a position, yay or nay, on it.
Who helped you with that?
I was doing the lobbying. Now, you know, Bill Russell and Jerry Taylor, they would help write up the bill analysis for things that were in their departments. And then Betty Anderson was the governor's legislative liaison, and so I met with all the other state government legislative liaisons, and Betty, every Friday afternoon, we went through every bill that was on every docket for the week and decided if, you know, the state had a position, yay or nay, on them. This is nuts. This is just nuts. Okay, but that's what we did. And so I was going up to the Hill. While the legislature was there, I was going up the Hill and doing all this work. And we had some legislation. There were bills that we were proposing, and then you really were responsible for meeting with the sponsors.
Because one of the first things that you had was those child support guidelines when you came in.
Exactly. That was on the plate there, and that had to be, if we didn't get those enacted, then the AFDC funds could be cut. This is this is millions and millions of dollars to the state. So it was real important that those get enacted. So that was a very big deal that first year. It was, and then I was, you know, meeting each week with the commissioners, all the assistant commissioners and the commissioner, and I was on the executive committee for that. And so we had to give advice to all the department staff. So there was stuff there. When I got there were stacks and stacks of things on the credenza behind the desk. There were stacks and stacks of things on the desk. I mean, it was like there was no way. And I started in March, and until July, I worked every day of the week.
Were you single?
No, I had a 9-year-old daughter at that point.
I want to take a moment and interrupt this
Yes,
story
yes.
to talk about how you got this daughter.
I was married.
I want to go back and talk a little bit about your personal life. At some point,
Mm-hmm.
You married
I did. In
And?
1978, actually,
when you were still at Legal Services.
when I was still at Legal Services.
Who did you marry?
I married Paul Schrag, and he was living in one of those group homes with men and women too, so, we both were into that.
How did you meet Paul?
I met him through friends of my brother James, who had gone to college with him, and they were living in that same housing that was men and women living together. And so I went over and had dinner at their house and met him there with them.
And where was he from?
He was from Kansas, Kingman, Kansas, out in the middle of the wheat fields and cows. That was all there was in
Was he a
Kingman.
farmer?
He grew up on a farm. Wheat and cows. Wheat and cows.
And what was he doing in
it.
Nashville?
He had come, a woman who was in that group house was his girlfriend from college, and he came to live with her. And so, after he came here to live with her, they broke up. And then he and I started dating, and so we got together and ultimately went together for 5 years, and then we got married. And we adopted our daughter from Colombia, South America, when she was 7 months old, Nan, and
What year was that?
that was in 1980.
Okay.
And so when I was...
What did Paul do?
Paul, at that point, was working for the state. He worked for the Department of Conservation and did various things there. Ultimately was deputy commissioner. He was an assistant commissioner, the deputy commissioner. He was a director. I mean, he sort of worked his way up through the Department of Conservation. And he left the state when I went to the state. That was interesting. And then he went to work with Marguerite Saleh and they started corporate child care that became Bright Horizons. So building daycare centers for businesses. And he did that for quite a number of years before he then went into created another business with some people doing facilities maintenance for folks. So he was a Renaissance guy. Paul could do anything. He could fix anything. He did all kinds of stuff. Wonderful man.
Okay.
Good husband. Great father.
And you decided to adopt
We did.
Nan Catherine
Nan
in 1980.
in 1980.
So that,
By the time I started, I guess she was just 7 then when I started, but she was 9.
how old was she when you
you?
adopted her?
She was 7 months old. She was a baby. Cute baby.
And how old is she today?
40.
And do you have any grandchildren?
4.
And who are they?
She has an 11-year-old son, Tristan, a 9-year-old son, Kyler, and twins, Chase and Josiah, who are 5. And the babies are why I retired. She got pregnant with twins. I decided she's going to need help.
And she's a nurse practitioner?
She is a nurse practitioner with Vanderbilt's Women's Health Program out in Cool Springs.
Knowing what you know now, would you recommend that any of your grandchildren become lawyers?
If they were interested in it, if they were interested in doing that, sure. I mean, I had a good career. I'm not sorry I did it. I hated law school, and gratefully, doing work part-time taught me that I actually wanted to do the work. So,
Well, let's go back and talk about where we were before
yeah.
You were talking about working 16 hours a day from March until July?
Yeah.
Never seen your sweet husband or your sweet
Well,
daughter?
I mean, I got home. I did try to get home to see her at least. But but I was working every day until I finally realized I could work 24/7. I could never leave here. I could stay here all the time. It would never make any difference. It's a drop in the bucket. I mean, it's an ocean here. I'm never going to make a dent. I just have to do a little bit of stomping out as many fires as I can and just keep on going. It was crazy work. And so I just developed a policy of, there was this Kathy, remember this little Kathy cartoon ad that someone came into her office and was going to put something on her desk and said, she said, "Don't put it there. That's the doomed pile. This is the little pile that I can actually do work on, and this is the things I'm working on today. But if it goes over there, it's the doomed pile. It never sees the light of day. That's the doomed pile." Well, there was a doomed pile. There were several doomed piles in my office, and if you put something on that pile, you actually needed to know about it, you'd better darn well come back and talk to me or ask me about it, because if it went into the doomed pile, it was gone for good. I mean, I never saw it again. I mean, it was gone.
During those 3 years that you were general counsel, did you have time for any additional civic work or political action work or anything like that?
Well, I still did, Bar Association. I mean, I belonged to committees still on the Bar Association, and I did...
The Domestic Relations Committee, for certain.
I did many years on.
Did you chair that at some point?
I did. More than 1 year for sure. And did work with LAW, step 2, and ultimately was president when I left the state. Anyway, that was it.
What would be your takeaway from those 3 years that you felt were important and significant working in that capacity as general counsel?
The thing that I did that year, I was chair of the LAW Banquet Committee, and we had Hillary Rodham Clinton speak.
Really?
That was very cool. I picked her up at the airport, took her to the hotel, took her out to dinner afterward. I mean, it was lovely. Had a wonderful time with her. Now, I was chair of the banquet committee that year, one of those years I was working for the state. Nuts! How did I have time to do any of that? I mean, it was crazy. Anyway, I did other stuff. I mean, I don't know how I did it. I have no freaking inkling how I managed to do it, but I did. And it seemed like because we had meetings in my office at DHS, we'd have banquet committee meetings, and
they'd come after work and meet with you?
Well, usually for lunch. We'd come over for lunch. We'd have lunch meetings, just sitting around my little table in my office. So, yeah, that was memorable, actually.
And what did you discover about lobbying?
Oh, Lord. Well, I actually, after I left the state, I did lobbying. When I went into private practice, I did lobbying for the National Association for Social Workers, and for the state organization, and for League of Women Voters. I think those were the two primarily that I did. So I actually learned something about how to do that. So that was a worthwhile skill to learn. But doing legislative work is hard work. It is really hard work. And so I, at some point, after I worked for the League of Women Voters for 9 years, and I finally had enough.
Was it all volunteer, or was any of it ever paid?
No, I was paid a very small amount. The League doesn't have a whole lot of money. So I was paid a small amount by both the social workers and the League. So it was a little bit of money working for my private practice, but for the amount of work that I did, it was not enough, for sure.
How many women, at the time that you were general counsel for the department, were general counsel in the other departments? You had Nancy Ann Min, who was your commissioner.
She was my commissioner. And, there were general counsel, Lord, how many would there have been? somebody was at Revenue. Who was at Revenue? I think there was a woman at Revenue. Can't think of her name. But I can't quite remember any other ones. I mean, Jim Schulman was over at Finance.
It was still
Administration.
unusual for women to be
Yeah.
put in
Yeah,
very significant positions. Is that right? And this is like
that's
the
true.
early 80s,
This is
mid 80s,
no, this is 87, 89.
late 80s.
Yeah, late 80s. Yeah, that was still, not common.
How had the
But clearly there were more and more. I mean, it was,
Changing.
increasing significantly. I mean, and, even the 3 years I was in law school, my last year, there were 36 women in that class, still out of 150. I mean, it's still not
Right.
proportionate.
And
Whereas now I think it's more than half.
correct? And
Uh.
how about the Bar Association? How had it changed as far as the number of women by the late 1980s?
Trying to think, Juliet was the first president. When was that? That would have been sometime.
This is Juliet Griffin.
Yeah. She was the first woman who was president of the bar, I think. It was the same year that Asta Underwood had practiced for 50 years, because I went to the banquet for Asta, and Juliet was announced as president. I was so amazed. It was wonderful.
About 86, 87.
Could have been. That might have been.
I remember Asta Underwood too.
So.
What
it was,
led you to
and
leave?
And that changed. Obviously now we've had
Right.
other numbers of other women who've been president of the bar.
What led you to leave the Department of Human Services?
Well, I early on recognized that this was a job, not a career. I was not going to, bless their hearts. They were wonderful people. Bill Russell stayed there until he retired, and he was a wonderful man, and he did a wonderful job. And he
It was a career for him.
it was a career for him, and he did become general counsel too after me. Anyway, but I was not going to do that forever. I actually liked trial work, and I would, and this was sheer administrative craziness, flat crazy work. It was just an overwhelming place, and it was.
Is that what?
Working for the state is like wading through marshmallow fluff. You don't get very far very fast. It doesn't hurt a whole lot, but it's just not, it's like pushing against. I mean, it's very hard to make a big difference in any way. I mean, it's like, driving a tanker on the ocean here,
As
big
you
boat.
said,
You
it's like
can't
keeping
turn
a
these on a
whale
dime. You can't turn them on a dime. They're not going to turn.
Okay, so what motivated you to move on?
Well, at some point, I simply decided this is enough. Nancy Ann left. She went to Washington, and so Bob Bruno came, and I liked him. He had been her deputy, and he was a good guy, and I liked working for him. But I just decided at some point there needs to be life after DHS. I'm going to move on and do something else. And I just started having lunch with my friends. I went to lunch with Charlie Warfield, and I went to lunch with Aleda, and I went to lunch with Irwin Venick, and I went to lunch with. I went to lunch with Judge Everett. I went out to lunch with different people and talked about, where would you think I would be happy working? And Irwin said that he and Larry would want me to come work with them. And Irwin and I, of course, were in law school together, and we had been good friends all the time. And I thought that would be a good fit too. So ultimately, that's what I decided to do. And I gave Bob 3 months' notice of every time I left. I did the same at Legal Aid. I wrote memos on all my files. I gave them, I think, 2 months' notice before I even left to go see, because Nancy Ann called me over the holidays, and I think I didn't go to work till March because I just needed to make sure I was not leaving anything in the lurch there, because I was really conscientious about
Now,
making sure my work was taken
this is
care of.
in the late 80s. Had technology changed at all at that time?
Well, of course. I mean, at Legal Aid, I remember the first computer we got, and we got it in the domestic relations section because it was so repetitively driven stuff. We had this computer that we had a little office that was padded because it made so much noise. You cannot imagine. It was just huge, and it was huge. I mean, it was this huge piece of equipment that was massively big, and it made a huge amount of noise. So that was the first experience with something that was sort of word processing of any degree that I remember dealing with. And so, of course, by the time I went to the state, there was a computer on my desk.
And faxing,
And there was faxing, of course.
but no
And
email.
no email. No email, no internet, no nothing.
Still
No
using your
Wi-Fi.
landline phone.
Absolutely, with a cord on it.
All right,
know,
so you
absolutely.
leave
Yeah, right.
DHS and you go with Irwin
Right,
and Larry Woods?
and Larry Woods.
And how long did that
uh,
last?
Another woman, oh God, what was her name?
Jinx?
Michelle.
No.
No, Jinx had left. Michelle, she ultimately went to Ashland City. She was only there
Briefly.
briefly. She wasn't there a big long time. So it was really me, Larry, and Irwin.
And then where did you go?
Well, then Larry decided, we were in those buildings at 17th and Division. And then Larry decided to sell those buildings. And he was just going to do the bookstore stuff. He was doing the bookstore stuff at that point. And so Irwin and I created our firm, and Gene Biasy was office sharing there with us. So Gene and Irwin and I started, and Linda Rose was office sharing with us too, and the four of us moved to Lowe's Vanderbilt Plaza and got offices there.
And how did you build your clients, your base?
Well, when I first went with Irwin and Larry, we sent out announcements to everyone and their cat that I ever knew. I mean, everybody. I made lists of everybody that we sent announcements out to. And so I had already built so this was in 90 that I went with them. In 93 is when we created the firm. So within that, really within a year and a half, I mean, they paid me a salary initially until I could build up my own practice, but I built up a practice within, I would say, a year. I was already paying myself and more.
Did your hours change from DHS?
Well, I had cut back on the crazy hours there. I mean, I realized it was spitting in the ocean here. I could not ever get ahead of anything. So I just did what I could do. And I went home at reasonable hours, and I saw my child and my husband, and I didn't just drive myself crazy like I did for those first few months, because I realized it could never all be done. It could not ever be done. It just had to be, I just had to do what I could do the best I could with what I could do, and then I'm going to go home to my husband and child. That's it. And it worked just fine. I mean, it was amazing that it was like nobody noticed that I wasn't there 7 days a week. I mean, who cared? Nobody cared that I was killing myself. It was like, didn't make any difference.
So you have this teenage daughter.
Oh, well, not. At some point she did turn into a teenager. Yes, that's true.
Well, in 93, she would have been 13.
Oh, and those were bad years. It
At
was
the home
sad
scene.
years.
That
was very sad years. Some really sad years for Nan's teenage years was really, and she will say to me now, Mom, I was awful. Yes, Nan, you were awful. She was awful. Awful child. She was an awful child.
But
She
you
was
had
a good child up until the crazies
friend
got
to
her.
commiserate with, the mother of
I
her
did.
good friend, Barbara Moss,
Excuse me.
another woman lawyer.
I think, yes, that was one of her partners in crime, Rebecca. Saw Rebecca and her 3 children the other day. It was really fun.
Both mothers survived their daughters.
We did, and there were several other friends of parents that we got together and sort of managed to try to.
And you had a wonderful husband.
I had a wonderful husband who had Paula and I mean, it was him and me against her, and we were losing. We were doing the best we can, but it was 2 against 1, and it was not, we weren't making.
And the nature of your practice at that time was what?
It was all, I did domestic relations pretty much.
And your involvement in civic affairs, were you still involved with groups like the
Well,
Y or LAW?
When I first, yeah, I was still involved with the Y. I was on their board for a long time, easily 9 years after I was president. You know, between the time I was president and whatever, I was on their board for a long time, and then was on a planning committee for them for a number of years after that. Haven't been involved in many years, but did continue that for a long time, and was involved with the caucus still, and you know, supported various political campaigns off and on, Lord knows.
Did you get heavily involved in any other political campaigns after you did the Ferraro campaign?
That really, I spent a huge amount of time doing that. Nan was 4. She was little when I was doing that. No, and I was at Legal Aid when I was doing that. That was lots of work. I never did anything as big as that. That was probably the most involved I ever was. I mean, I would work a poll for people and do various things. I mean, for different folks. I worked in Betty Nixon and Walter's campaigns. I did stuff for Walter at various times, and for Jim Shulman, and for
In local politics.
Local politics. I did local politics primarily, kinds of things.
While you were
Bill Purcell's.
Bill Purcell.
I worked in Purcell's campaign.
When he ran for mayor,
When
another
he ran
lawyer.
for mayor, I did, and who else? Maybe Carl's. I think I did in Carl's too.
Carl Dean.
And anyway, yeah.
Megan Berry.
Yeah. I
Little
did
bit?
work in Mary and Megan's. Seems like.
Okay.
Or either I just gave her money. I don't remember, quite frankly. Possibly. At some point I decided not to work polls anymore. It's
Okay.
too damn much trouble.
With your partnership
Yeah.
and the individuals that you named,
Right.
you had a continuing domestic relations practice
I
and
did.
became quite well known for that. How long did you and Irwin stay partners?
Well, till I retired.
And when was that?
I retired in 2015 when Nan got pregnant with twins.
All right. Now, let me back up just a little
Mhm.
bit. During the time that you were practicing domestic relations, did you feel that women had become more accepted in the practice of law over that period?
There were lots more of us, for sure. And then there were more women judges, too. So that changed big time. I mean, you know, when we first started practicing, there were no women judges, nowhere, no time, no how. I mean, Judge Trimble and Judge Luton were doing the divorces back then. And, Judge Trimble made you wear dresses in the courtroom. I told you of going into the bathroom and finding another lawyer's secretary there standing in her slip because she had to give her dress to somebody to go into the courtroom.
Clients and lawyers who were
Yes,
women had to
yes,
wear dresses.
women had to wear dresses until he ran for office, and then he had to change that policy because it was
And in
Too big a deal.
1993, that was about the time that email came on the scene. Somewhere in the 90s.
I can't remember. Been too long.
All right.
Kind of a blur.
Well,
When did we have Wi-Fi? I can't even tell. I
but
guess
things
we
were
did.
happening in your personal life because at some point your husband became ill.
That wasn't until Paul got sick in 2005.
So you had been there about,
No, actually, he got sick in 2002, and he died in 2008. But he was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy in 2005. We knew what it was finally in 2005. Yeah, that was bad. That was the tragedy of my life, for Paul to get sick and die. It was really bad. He was 61 when he died, so
Very young.
not that old. I was counting on him being around a lot longer than this.
truly a
So,
wonderful person, as
he
you
was
said,
a
a Renaissance man.
Wonderful person. So that was really heartbreaking, and a tragic time in my life, for sure. When we started practice, too, I'm trying to remember if Irwin Kuhn, when we moved to Lowe's, Irwin Kuhn moved there too, I think. Or maybe when we moved upstairs. Anyway, sometime there in the 90s, Irwin Kuhn
Join the practice.
joined the practice, and it was me, Irwin Venick, Gene Biasi, and Irwin Kuhn.
Right.
And it was the four of us practicing, and we shared offices with Linda Rose for a while, and then she got offices in the building elsewise. So
And your practice remained primarily domestic.
it did. It did.
Did you notice any change in the nature of domestic relations practice over the time period from 93 until 2015 when you
Well,
retired?
other things that I got involved in too was the mediation field. In fact, I was involved in that organization that first started trying to get mediation set up. Boy, that would have been back in the early 90s, I think. And so was also involved in getting, mediation accepted and getting, judges were first real resistant to it and hesitant to do it, and then they loved it, it went from, as like the guidelines were, they hated the guidelines, and then they loved the guidelines, and then it was like, and then the guidelines changed. It's, there's been all kinds of
Did you
changes over the
find
years.
you got qualified as a mediator?
No, I
No.
never did. I just was very supportive of it, and there were enough mediators out there, and I didn't want to do it. But, I did mediation a lot as everybody did. Everybody had to do mediation. But I was real supportive of that organization, belonged to the organization, supported that, and
Did you
encouraged
still
it.
stay active in the local bar?
Yeah, I did.
And
And LAW too. I still went to luncheons and kept up with whatever, so.
during the time that you were in private practice, what significant events occurred that gave you pause or that you remember from 1993 to 2015?
Good heavens, that's a long time.
It is. How had conditions...
I did work in Obama's campaign. I forgot about that.
Obama?
I did work in Obama's campaign. I went to North Carolina and registered voters for Obama.
So you still had it in you.
Kitty Calhoun and I did that. We drove over there one weekend and did voter registration for Obama. We did. Yep.
There may be a future for you somewhere.
Who knows? No, I'm too old to do all that anymore.
Never say never.
Never say never. Right.
Well, there are things like the civil rights movement. What did you
Certainly.
observe about the change in race relations over the last 20 years?
Well, and certainly, again, there, when we started too, there were darn few black lawyers too. There just weren't very many, and certainly that has improved, and diversity of in the legal field has gotten better. But, Nashville has always been an interesting town in terms of race relations, and really I think we have the sit-in folks to thank for that, and Mayor West to thank for that, they're, committed to not burning down this town over race relations, and committed to segregation ending and integration happening without there being violence and all kinds of.
And how would you say,
things.
how would you describe the change in the women's movement over those years, from 93 to about 2015, or even today?
Well, and certainly there's still work to be done, but we have come a long way in terms of women on the judiciary and women in practice, and, law schools now being 50-50, maybe even more so, some of them. I mean, that's a huge change from when
You began.
I first started, even private practice, but that has slowly, and it's an incremental change. It's not been an overnight change, but it's slowly improving. But the fact that we have now a woman of Black and Asian descent as a vice president is huge as far as I'm concerned, and that women have continued to make strides in. Our legislature doesn't reflect it, I'm afraid, but other places have done better than Tennessee has. So maybe there's some time that will change. We'll slowly make some more progress too.
Do you think that there has been legislation that has impacted for the better or the worse in domestic relations?
Well, I think the mediation stuff has improved. Well, and certainly the no-fault divorces were huge, and that was a long, long time ago. And Judge Trumbull hated the no-fault divorces, but he just had to get with the program of it. Well, I mean, they kept having to change the statute for him alone because he kept not wanting to let people get divorced without him knowing why they wanted a divorce.
Well, do you think legislation with regards to how domestic abuse has changed?
Well, the protective order thing, actually, I helped get that passed that summer, in 78, actually. I had law students, this was money from the Carter era. I had law students who, Ann Young helped, no, that was the UCCJA, Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Act, and that was an important piece too.
Child custody, right?
Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Act for people, interstate custody battles, which were nightmares for low-income people. And that really made a huge difference. We got that legislation done then too. But Abby Rubenfeld and Mary Walker did court watching, and that's how we got the protective order legislation passed. And legal aid helped to get that done back then. So that was important, and that is important legislation, although I think it's still, I was reading in the paper, and it still needs some more work. Obviously, there's still some progress that needs to be made in terms of getting weapons removed from people
right.
in a safe way so that they're not able to get them back easily when that's a danger to folks. Because we still have too many people who die in domestic violence situations. So there's still work to be done, but that is definitely an improvement and something that has been important, for sure.
Have you stayed involved in community activities since retirement?
Since retirement, well, actually, I'm, been involved in the Quaker meeting since man was a baby, really, a little person. And in relationship to that, got involved in a program called Alternatives to Violence Project in 2004. just out on a wild hair, went to a training program, a workshop on Alternatives to Violence project in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, Blountville, Alabama. And it is a program that focuses on respect for self, caring for others, expect the best, looking for the good in a situation, think before reacting, ask for a nonviolent solution, and if you can put all that together, you can transform a situation that could be bad, violent, dangerous, into one that's at least neutral, if not good. And it's an experiential training program. It's not lecture down. It's interactive. There are activities and exercises that people do together, and it's fun. You play, which is community building. And so I became a facilitator in 2005 for that program, and I have been involved in that significantly since then. I have gone to 2 international conferences, one in Dublin, Ireland in 2014, and one in Kathmandu, Nepal in 2017. That was a trip, Lord. Further than I've ever been or will ever go again. And I've gone to national conferences in various places in the United States. But I've met people all over the country and all over the world that are doing the same work in other countries.
Alternatives to Violence.
Alternatives to Violence Project, AVP. And it is the best thing I've ever done in my life. It is so much fun, and I love doing it. And then the group that I'm involved with here more recently have been in the last several years doing work with it at the women's jail and the women's prison, and that has been extremely rewarding volunteer work. And I was doing that before I retired, and we were going, I guess I started working part-time. Sometime I started working part-time before I retired. The last year or so, I was working 3 days a week. And 2 days a week, one day I was going to the women's jail, and then we started going to the women's prison and doing AVP in the morning. And after I retired, I was doing that. I was going out to Nan's 2 days a week, helping with babies. 2 babies, 1 + 1 baby is more than 2 babies. If you're looking at the babies,
every parent knows that.
Twins are crazy. Twins are way crazy. I mean, I just couldn't imagine ever dealing with 2 babies at the same time is just nuts.
And what do you do at the women's jail and the women's prison?
We do Alternatives to Violence Project training.
Training for them, for the staff?
Not the staff, for the prisoners.
Inmates. Okay.
For the prisoners. And it's the program that started in prisons. It started in prisons in 1975. And so it's done in prisons a lot of places. It's done in the communities too. And so that's just been really rewarding work. But COVID, of course, shut that down. And so hopefully before the end of the year, we will go back and do this again. And that will be something I will definitely go back to doing. And so I still go out to my daughter's house 1 day a week because the little boys are now in preschool 3 days a week. So I'm not there 2 days a week as I was for quite a long time. Because she works 3 days a week, and I was going out there the 2 days that she was off. But now, one of those days, the little boys are at preschool, so I don't
And you're still keeping your license current?
No, I'm not. I retired my license for good cause. I kept it. I always liked what I did. I enjoyed my work. I liked working at Legal Aid. Even the work I did at the state, crazy as it was rewarding work. I learned a lot. I'm not sorry I did it. It just was too crazy. I just couldn't do it forever. In my private practice, I always really liked it. Key to that was liking the people you work with. I always had wonderful partners, and I love them. People are just wonderful people. So I miss the people, but I don't. So I kept my license for a year after I retired, thinking I would still want to do it, because I always liked doing it. Turns out I don't. I was done. When I quit, I was finished. I kept my license for a year. I didn't do a lick of work. Did not touch a legal nada. I didn't do a bit. And I didn't miss it. It was like, gee, who knew? I was actually finished. 34 years was it. It was enough. I'm really done. So after that first year, I just retired my license and never looked back. I mean, I have not missed it an inkling. I'm glad I quit, even though I did it for my babies.
Well, this Alternatives to Violence program seems like it keeps you interested and busy.
Totally busy, and love doing it.
So,
love doing it, and because I went to one of my facilitator friends was in doing a workshop in Fayetteville, and I went over there for a weekend and worked with her. And so you can go places and do this, different places, and again, traveling all over the world. And some, I may just travel again. Once we're able to travel again, I may go someplace and do AVP other places. Who knows?
are there projects that you have in mind that you haven't started yet or want to start?
I would like to travel again. I have traveled before. I mean, I've traveled in Europe, and Paul and I did traveling in Europe, which was lovely. And then since Paul died, I did one of the biking cruises in Europe, which was lovely. And I've been to Japan 4 times with my brother, who...
Is he still
taught
going to
Japanese.
Japan?
He will again whenever we're able to go to Japan. Won't let you in now,
No.
but once you can get back in, I'm sure he will. And I would like to go to Japan one more time at least. I have maybe one more Japan trip in me. It's 14 hours to go there, but it's really worth it. I'd love to go one more time.
What parts of Japan did you visit?
Kyoto. I went to Tokyo only one. I've been four times. And I only went to Tokyo on one trip, and I would never go again. Tokyo is just like New York or London, neon. And see, it was bombed in the war, and so it's all new. And Kyoto is old. It is the ancient capitals, and Nara is the ancient capital. And so those are the places that I like going, and I would go there again in a heartbeat because it was so much fun, and I would do it in a minute.
Do you,
And we're going to see Nanas from Colombia, South America, and we want to take the little boys there. So there's a Colombia trip someplace in our plans. The littlest boys needs to get a little bigger before we do it. But there is another Colombia trip in there sometime, because we will go there and take them there sometime. So, don't know where else. There's lots of places in the States I haven't been and I'd like to travel to, but traveling is something I'd like to do.
what?
Don't want to do legal work. No legal work. I'm done.
What question is there that I haven't asked you about your career or the practice of law, where you are right now?
I think probably that's...
Any advice for young women entering the law?
Well, it is a field that has a lot of options to it. You have a lot of choices clearly, there are people that have done all kinds of things that I never did with my legal practice that you can do. So it gives you a lot of options to do different things. And my practice was not as varied as some people's have been, but
It's been fairly varied.
yeah, I did some different things, but you were on the bench. You can be a judge. Hey, if that's the kind of thing that you want to do. There's all kinds of things that one can do with a law degree. So I think it's a credential that is handy, and you can do a lot of things with it, and it gives you some choices. And if you find it interesting and are willing to work pretty hard, it does require work. I feel like I worked at doing a good job in everything that I did. So don't look back on it and feel like, gee, I wish I worked harder. Nope, don't think I needed to have worked harder than I did. I worked pretty hard. So, but it was a career, like I say, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it while I did it. But as it turned out, when I was finished, I was done. I've moved on to other things.
And we are done, and I
Good.
want to thank you so much.
You are welcome. I enjoyed it. You fix it?